It's 2:14 in the morning, and you're staring at a phone that hasn't lit up in 9 days. Not because you're waiting for an apology, not because you missed the arguments. You're waiting because some part of you still believes that if you just hold still long enough, the silence will break and everything will make sense again. That belief is the real threat in this story, and it has a name. Psychologists call it the pursuit reflex, meaning the automatic urge to chase reassurance the second it disappears. And if you are an empath, this reflex has probably been running your life longer than you realize. It doesn't announce itself as weakness. It shows up dressed as loyalty, as patience, as hope. But underneath, it's a pattern quietly draining your energy every single day. You stay locked in it. And on the other side of that silence, someone with an avoidant attachment style is running a completely different program, one built to protect them from the exact closeness you were trying to give. Here's what nobody tells you about the moment two people like this go no contact. It isn't a clean break. It's the start of two separate psychological unravelings happening on two completely different timelines. And almost everyone watching this relationship from the outside gets the order backwards. They assume the empath falls apart while the avoidant walks away untouched. That assumption is wrong, and by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why, including the one moment, usually somewhere between week 3 and week 6, where the entire emotional balance of the relationship quietly flips upside down. Stay with me, because there's a specific text message almost every empath feels the pull to send around day 11 of no contact. And I'm going to tell you exactly why sending it would cost you everything you've already gained. Before we go further, let's be honest about what this relationship actually looked like while it was still alive. You were the one who noticed when something felt off. You were the one replaying a 3-word text for 2 hours trying to find the hidden meaning inside it. You were the one apologizing first, even in arguments you didn't start. Meanwhile, the avoidant in your life had a different job. Their job, whether they realized it or not, was managing distance. When things got too close, too warm, too real, something inside them would quietly pull the emotional plug, and you'd feel the temperature in the room drop without understanding why. That's the trap. Before you understood this pattern, you thought you were failing at love. You thought if you just communicated better, gave more space, stayed calmer, the distance would stop happening. After you understand this pattern, you realize the distance was never about you failing. It was about a nervous system protecting itself from something it learned a long time ago to associate with danger. That single shift in understanding is where this story actually begins. Day 1 of no contact rarely feels like freedom. For the empath, it feels like a limb has gone missing. You built your days around checking in, even in small ways. A meme sent at lunch, a goodnight text, a single line asking how their day went. When that rhythm disappears overnight, your brain doesn't experience it as relief. It experiences it as a 5-alarm fire. Because for months or years, your nervous system was trained to treat their attention as safety. Remove the attention and the alarm goes off. So you replay things. You dissect the last conversation like it's a crime scene. Was it the comment about their mother? The night you canceled plans? The way you said fine when you clearly weren't fine? Here's the pattern interrupt you need right now. None of that replaying is actually about finding the truth. It's about avoiding the much scarier question underneath it, which is simply, what do I do with all this love I still have and know where to put it? That question is the real work of the first stage. And most empaths skip straight past it by staying busy inside the relationship, even after the relationship has technically ended. You check their social media. You imagine what they're doing right now. You wonder if they've already moved on, and somewhere inside a small, cruel voice tells you that if they have, it proves you never mattered in the first place. That voice is lying to you, and here's the proof. Think about the specific moments this shows up in real life. You're standing in a grocery store and a song plays overhead, one that meant nothing special until it played during a car ride you'll never forget, and suddenly your chest tightens in the middle of the cereal aisle. You're scrolling through old photos, not to torture yourself, but because some part of you is searching for a piece of evidence that the connection was real, that you didn't imagine the depth of it. A friend mentions they saw your ex out at dinner, looking fine, laughing, and your stomach drops because somewhere inside, you're still measuring your own healing against their apparent lack of struggle. Here's a psychology term worth understanding because it explains exactly what's happening in your mind during this stage. It's called cognitive dissonance, meaning two completely opposite beliefs living inside the same mind at the same time. Part of you knows the relationship was inconsistent, painful, and unsustainable. Another part of you desperately wants to believe it was the deepest connection you've ever had. Both beliefs feel true simultaneously, and that internal tug of war is exhausting precisely because your mind hates holding contradictions. It wants resolution, and in the absence of real answers, it will manufacture stories just to make the discomfort stop. This is why so many empaths find themselves constructing elaborate theories during no contact. Maybe they're scared. Maybe they need space to process their feelings. Maybe they're testing to see if I'll come back first. Some of these theories might even contain a grain of truth, but notice what they all have in common. Every single one of them keeps you emotionally tethered to the outcome, still waiting, still hoping, still assigning your own peace of mind to someone else's next move. On the other side of the silence, something very different is unfolding, and it rarely looks like grief. In the first stretch of no contact, most avoidants feel something closer to relief. And if you're the empath reading their silence as confirmation that they never cared, I need you to pause right there, because relief and indifference are not the same emotion wearing different clothes. Relief simply means the pressure valve just got released. For an avoidant, closeness itself can feel like a threat, not because they're cold, but because somewhere in their emotional wiring, intimacy got linked to loss of control or engulfment, or the fear of being fully seen and then rejected for what's underneath. When the relationship goes quiet, that internal alarm quiets down too. Their shoulders drop, their thoughts clear. For a while, life feels lighter, simpler, easier to manage. And to anyone watching from the outside, including you, it looks like proof that they never needed you at all. But here's the second open loop I promised you, the one almost nobody talks about. That relief has an expiration date, and when it runs out, what replaces it is not more relief. It's something the avoidant has spent years running from. And we're going to get to exactly what that is. But first, you need to understand what's happening inside you during this same window, because your story and theirs are about to move in opposite directions. Somewhere around the second week, the chaos in the empath's mind starts to change shape. The panic doesn't vanish, but it stops controlling every hour of the day. This is where a strange thing begins happening. With no one left to fix, no relationship left to manage, no emotional puzzle left to solve, your attention has nowhere left to go except inward. And for a person who has spent years fluent in everyone else's feelings, turning that same fluency toward yourself feels almost foreign. You start noticing things you couldn't see while you were inside the relationship. How tired you actually were, how often you shrank your own needs to avoid rocking the boat. How many times you told yourself their inconsistency was actually depth, that their distance was actually mystery, that their silence was actually a sign they needed space to process, rather than a sign they simply weren't choosing you the way you were choosing them. This is the moment the fantasy starts to crack, and it cracks slowly, not all at once. Here's a pattern interrupt worth remembering. Pain narrows your vision, but clarity widens it. In the beginning of no contact, your memory acts like a highlight reel, replaying only the good nights, the inside jokes, the one time they showed up for you in a way that felt like everything. As the weeks stretch on, the footage gets longer. You start remembering the waiting, the over-explaining, the nights you fell asleep composing a text you were too afraid to send. This isn't bitterness creeping in. It's the truth finally getting a turn to speak. Meanwhile, back on the avoidance side of the silence, that expiration date on relief starts approaching. Because here's the part their old defense system never accounted for. As long as you were still reachable, still hoping, still available in the background of their life, they never had to fully experience what losing you would actually feel like. There was always an unspoken safety net, the quiet assumption that you'd still be there if they ever decided to reach back. No contact removes that net completely. Days without a message become weeks. The certainty that you'll always circle back starts to erode, and for the first time, the avoidant is forced to sit with a possibility they never had to consider before, that you might actually be building a life that doesn't include them. This isn't an instant realization. It usually arrives in fragments. A song on the radio, driving past a restaurant you used to go to together, a quiet Tuesday night with nothing to distract from the thought that keeps trying to surface. Picture what this actually looks like for the avoidant during those first 2 weeks. They throw themselves into work with a kind of focus that surprises even them. They make plans with friends they hadn't seen in months. They tell themselves, and sometimes tell others, that this was the right decision, that things had become too much, too heavy, too demanding. For a while, this story holds together perfectly. Productivity feels good. Independence feels good. The absence of conflict feels, for the first time in a long time, like peace instead of loneliness. But peace built on avoidance has a very specific weakness. It only works as long as there's something to keep the mind occupied. The moment the distractions thin out, a quiet Sunday afternoon with nothing scheduled, a long drive with no podcast playing, the 10 minutes before falling asleep when the mind finally has nowhere else to go, something starts leaking through the cracks. At first it's small, a flicker of a memory, a passing thought quickly pushed aside. But the mind has a way of returning to unfinished business, especially the emotional kind, and this business is far from finished. This is where the third open loop starts to open, the one about what actually happens inside an avoidance nervous system once the distraction runs out. And I promise you, it explains almost everything about why some avoidants seem to disappear completely while others come back changed. But we're not there yet, because right now, back on your side of this story, something important is happening that most people completely miss. You stop chasing, not because you gave up and not because you stopped caring, but because the part of you that used to reach first, apologize first, initiate first, finally runs out of fuel for a role nobody ever thanked you for playing. This is not weakness. This is the exact moment your nervous system starts recalibrating away from anxious pursuit and towards something steadier. And here's the part that changes the entire power dynamic of the relationship without either of you saying a single word. For as long as this relationship existed, it ran on an invisible contract. You provide the pursuit, they provide the distance, you chase, they retreat, and the whole system stays in motion because both roles keep feeding each other. The moment you stop chasing, that entire system loses its engine. There's no one left to widen the gap when they pull back because you're no longer running toward it. This is not a strategy. This is not a manipulation tactic. This is simply what happens when a nervous system finally exhausts a pattern that was never sustainable in the first place. And this is exactly the moment the avoidant, without fully understanding why, starts to feel something shift. Before, when they created distance, there was always a predictable response. You'd notice, you'd reach out, you'd try to close the gap they opened. Now the gap just stays open, silent, unclaimed. And a strange thing happens to a nervous system that's used to controlling closeness through distance. When nobody chases the distance anymore, it stops feeling like safety and starts feeling like something closer to abandonment. Here's the pattern interrupt that matters most in this entire story. Power was never about making someone miss you. It was never about winning or proving a point or forcing someone to finally see your worth. The real shift happens because dependency itself changes shape. You were dependent on their attention to feel emotionally safe. They were dependent on your consistency to feel emotionally free. Remove both sides of that dependency, and two people who spent months orbiting each other are suddenly forced to stand entirely on their own for the first time. Let's talk about what this actually looks like in your own daily life, because understanding it in theory is very different from living it. It looks like waking up on a random Tuesday and realizing you didn't check your phone first thing, not because you forgot, but because your mind had something else to think about. It looks like going an entire dinner with friends without mentioning their name once, not out of forced restraint, but because the conversation simply never pulled you back there. It looks like feeling a flicker of an old memory and noticing it pass through you like weather instead of pulling you under like a current. None of these moments feel dramatic while they're happening. They rarely feel like victories in the moment, but stacked together over weeks, they are the actual architecture of healing built quietly, brick by brick, while you were focused on simply getting through the day. Meanwhile, the people around you might not understand what's happening internally, and this creates its own strange pressure. Friends and family wanting to protect you often push you toward premature closure. They tell you to delete the photos, block the number, move on completely, as if healing works like flipping a switch. Other times they do the opposite, quietly implying that you're taking too long, that you should be over this by now, that dwelling on it isn't healthy. Both reactions, however well-intentioned, miss something important. Healing an attachment wound is not a linear timeline other people get to set for you. It happens in its own order, at its own pace, and the only person qualified to know where you actually are in that process is you. This is the part where most videos about no contact stop right at the cliffhanger of will they come back, because that question gets the clicks. But that question is a trap, and I want you to hear this clearly. Whether they come back is not actually the most important outcome of this story. What matters far more is what each of you does with the silence while nobody's watching. Let's go back to that second open loop, the one about what fills the space once an avoidance relief runs out. It isn't guilt and it isn't obligation. It's memory arriving uninvited, usually late at night, usually when there's nothing left to distract from it. They start remembering not the arguments, not the pressure, but the specific quality of being known by someone who paid attention, the way you remembered small details, the way you showed up during hard weeks, the particular kind of safety that comes from being fully seen by someone who never demanded you perform. Here's the strange irony almost nobody explains well. Some avoidants feel closer to the person they lost only after that person is gone. Not because distance creates love, but because distance removes the fear that made closeness feel dangerous in the first place. The very thing that once felt suffocating starts to feel, in hindsight, like something rare. This doesn't mean they'll reach out. It doesn't mean they've changed. It simply means the version of you that lives in their memory is finally getting an honest hearing, one that wasn't possible while their defenses were fully active. There's a specific pattern worth naming here because it explains why some avoidants seem to vanish for months, only to resurface with a message that feels almost too calm, too composed, too late. During the relationship, their attention was constantly split between managing intimacy and managing distance, like running two demanding jobs at once. Once the relationship ends, one of those jobs disappears entirely. There's no more intimacy to manage, no more closeness to regulate, no more emotional temperature to monitor in real time. What's left is simply the memory of the relationship, unfiltered by the pressure that used to distort it. This is often when an avoidant does something that looks from the outside like growth. They might start therapy. They might read about attachment styles for the first time. They might have a long conversation with a friend where they finally say out loud, I think I do this thing where I push people away right when they get close. None of this happens because they suddenly discovered they were wrong about everything. It happens because for the first time, there's enough quiet in their life to actually hear the pattern instead of just living inside it. And now, The third open loop, the one about the reflex named at the very beginning of this video. Remember the pursuit reflex, that automatic pull to chase reassurance the moment it disappears? That reflex doesn't just live in empaths. Avoidants have their own version of it, except theirs runs backward. Instead of chasing closeness, they chase distance the moment closeness feels too real. But once the relationship is gone entirely, there's no more closeness left to chase distance from. The reflex has nothing left to do, and a nervous system with nowhere left to run often has no choice but to finally sit still, and sitting still is where their own reckoning usually begins. This is the moment where the paths of both people, still separated by silence, start to mirror each other in a way neither one expected. The empath is learning to sit with themselves instead of chasing someone else's approval. The avoidant is learning to sit with feelings instead of running from them. Neither lesson requires the other person to come back. Both lessons only require staying in the discomfort long enough to let something new grow underneath it. It helps to picture this as two separate rooms, each person working through something alone, unaware of exactly what's happening in the other room, but somehow moving through parallel versions of the same lesson. In one room, the empath is slowly learning that their worth was never actually up for negotiation, that it didn't depend on being chosen consistently by someone who struggled to choose anyone consistently, including themselves. In the other room, the avoidant is slowly learning that distance never actually protected them from pain. It only delayed it, and often made it heavier by the time it finally arrived. Neither person can see into the other's room. Neither one needs to. The work only counts if it happens regardless of an audience. This is also the stage where old triggers start losing their grip in small, almost invisible ways. A notification sound that used to send your heart racing now barely registers. A mutual friend brings up their name in conversation, and instead of your whole body tensing, you simply nod and keep listening. These moments are easy to miss because they don't announce themselves. Healing rarely arrives as a single dramatic breakthrough. It arrives as 1,000 small non-reactions, stacking quietly until one day you realize the grip that used to control your whole nervous system has loosened without you even noticing the exact moment it happened. Here's the before and after that actually matters more than any reunion fantasy. Before understanding this, you believed the relationship's silence was a verdict on your worth. After understanding this, you recognize the silence was simply revealing a pattern that had nothing to do with your value and everything to do with two different nervous systems handling closeness in two different ways. That single reframe is worth more than any message they could ever send you. Now let's talk honestly about what happens if contact eventually resumes, because this is where so many people get it wrong. If two people return to each other without doing this internal work, the relationship doesn't heal, it simply resets the same clock. The empath goes back to reaching first. The avoidant goes back to needing space the moment things deepen. The excitement of reunion covers the old pattern for a while, sometimes weeks, sometimes months, and then the exact same cycle starts rebuilding itself, brick by familiar brick. This is why no contact by itself was never the magic. Time doesn't heal a pattern. Distance doesn't create insight on its own. What actually creates change is what each person chooses to do inside that silence. Did the empath learn to source safety internally instead of externally? Did the avoidant learn to tolerate closeness without treating it as a threat? Those two questions matter infinitely more than whether a text ever gets sent. Consider two very different versions of a reunion. In the first version, contact resumes after 6 weeks of silence, and both people are essentially the same as they were before. The empath still equates love with proving their worth through effort. The avoidant still equates closeness with losing their sense of self. The honeymoon phase of reconnection lasts about a month, filled with grand gestures and relieved reassurances, And then one ordinary Tuesday, the empath asks a question that feels too direct, and the avoidant feels that familiar tightness in their chest, and the whole cycle begins rebuilding itself using the exact same bricks as before. In the second version, contact resumes after that same 6 weeks, but something is different underneath the surface. The empath has learned to notice the urge to over-explain and chooses instead to simply state their needs once and let the response speak for itself. The avoidant has learned to recognize the tightness in their chest as an old alarm system rather than an accurate danger signal, and instead of creating distance, they name the discomfort out loud for the first time in their life. This version doesn't guarantee a perfect relationship. Nothing does, but it gives the relationship an actual chance to become something different than what it was, instead of simply repeating itself with better lighting.